The phone is still on the table. I haven't moved it. 40 years, and I haven't moved it. Not really. It just sits somewhere different now, and I look at it the same way. That's what I want you to understand before I say anything else. The thing that ruins a man isn't the thing that happens to him. It's the thing he does after. It's what he becomes once the door closes and nobody's watching anymore. That's what I've been sitting with. That's what wakes me at 2 in the morning and won't let me go back down. It started with a phone call that wasn't for me. Her mother called the apartment on a Tuesday. I remember it was Tuesday because I had just come off a double shift at the plant, 16 hours of noise and heat, and I had grease under my fingernails. I couldn't get out, no matter how long I scrubbed. I picked up the phone because Delia wasn't there. She was at her parents' house for the week. That's what she had told me. Her mother wasn't feeling well, and she needed to go stay with them for a few days. So when her mother called, I thought, well, maybe she needs to speak to Delia about something particular, something she didn't want to say in front of the others. I said, "She's there with you, isn't she?" And the line went quiet. Not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone realizing something is now broken that cannot be put back. Her mother said, "Baby, she hasn't been here. I thought she was with you." I stood there in that kitchen with the phone against my ear, and I could hear the refrigerator hum, and I could feel the grease still under my nails. And I said, "Yes, Mom. I think I got confused. She'll call you back. Don't worry about it." And I hung up. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to tell you that I fell apart right there, that I broke down in that kitchen and sobbed into my hands. And maybe if I had done that, maybe if I had let it be a wound right then, maybe things would have gone differently. But I didn't. Something went quiet in me. Not peaceful quiet. A different kind. The kind that comes right before you do something you cannot take back. I knew about Marcus. I had known about Marcus for a little while in the way that a man knows something he doesn't let himself fully know. You understand what I mean. When you catch a tone in a voice, when somebody puts their phone face down on the table a little too fast, when a woman used to reach for your hand in the car and now she doesn't, and you tell yourself she's just tired, she's just stressed, it's just the season you're in. I had been telling myself a lot of things. Marcus was her friend from college. She always said best friend, but she said it the way women say it when they want the word to do a particular job, to close a door they know you've already seen through. He worked in Atlanta, traveled for work. She spoke to him on the phone sometimes, and she never went to another room to do it. And I think now that was on purpose. I think that was its own kind of lie, the kind where you make the truth so visible that nobody thinks to question it. I put the phone down, and I went and sat in the chair by the window. And I thought, not about what to do in the way a man thinks when he's angry and wants to do something fast. I thought slowly. I thought the way you think when something has frozen over inside you and you're walking out onto the ice very carefully and testing each step. I thought about the rent I had paid every month for 3 years. I thought about the way I used to bring her coffee before she woke up, just the way she liked it, 2 sugars and enough cream to turn it the color of sand. I thought about the night I worked overtime for 6 weeks straight so we could afford to fix the car, and she could drive to her sister's wedding without worrying. I thought about all the small dignities I had handed her, one by one, with both hands, believing she was holding them. And then I thought about what I was going to do. I want you to understand something. In that moment, I told myself I was calm. I told myself I was being reasonable. I told myself that a man who loses his mind does the obvious thing, the loud thing, and that I was better than that. I was being smart. That's what I told myself. And that's the lie I have lived with ever since, because what I was actually doing was gathering myself up for something very cold and very deliberate, and I was calling it composure, when the truth is, it was something much darker than that. I called her cell phone. She answered on the second ring. She sounded easy, a little warm, the way she sounded when she hadn't been thinking about me. I said, "Hey, just checking in. How's your mama doing?" She said, "Oh, she's better today. We went for a little walk this afternoon." I said, "That's good. I'm glad she's feeling better." She said, "How was work?" I said, "Long. You know how it is." She said, "I'll be back Friday. We can do something nice." I said, "Yeah, let's do that." I hung up the phone and I sat back down in the chair and I stayed there until the room went dark and I didn't turn the lights on. That was the moment, right there. That was where I could have done the human thing. I could have called back. I could have asked her to tell me the truth. I could have gotten in the car and driven to wherever she was and stood in front of her and let it be ugly and real and maybe survivable. People survive those things. Marriages come apart and people survive them. But I didn't do any of that. What I did was I began to plan. And I am telling you this now because I am 81 years old and I can feel the end of things in my chest in the mornings when I breathe. And I have not said this out loud to another person, not once, not in 40 years, not to my brother, not to a pastor, not to a doctor, not to anyone. And the weight of it has a shape. It has a particular shape that I carry on my left side, just below the ribs. And it is heavier some nights than others. And tonight it is very heavy. I had 2 weeks. She was coming back on Friday. And I had from that Tuesday night until the following Friday to do what I was going to do. And I want to walk you through it, not because I'm proud of it, but because I think a man has to say a thing clearly before he can stand under it honestly. The first thing I did was I went to the bank. We had a joint account. We had been saving for 3 years. Not a fortune. We were not wealthy people. But it was ours. It was something we had built from nothing. And there was enough in that account to mean something. I withdrew it all over the course of 4 days. A little each day, so nothing would flag. I put it in an account with just my name at a different bank on the other side of the city. I was very calm about this. I told myself it was protection. I told myself I was just securing what I had earned. And that was partly true. I had earned most of it. But that's not why I did it, and I knew it even then. The second thing I did was I called her father. I had always liked her father, a tall, quiet man who shook your hand and meant it, who had worked the same job for 30 years and never complained about it, who loved his daughter with the kind of steady, silent love that doesn't know what to do with itself. I called him and I told him. I told him everything I knew. I told him about Marcus. I told him that she hadn't been staying with them, that she had been somewhere else, that she had been lying to both of us. I told him quietly, and I told him in detail, and I watched myself doing it from a distance, the way you watch someone in a dream. And I knew that what I was doing was taking something away from her that she could not get back, which was the version of herself that her father believed in. He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said, "Son, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to let her come home first." He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I want her to come home first." I don't know if he understood what I meant by that. I don't know if I fully understood what I meant by that, but I know now. What I meant was that I wanted her to come home feeling easy. I wanted her to walk through that door thinking everything was fine and that I was her husband and that her life was intact. I wanted that because what was coming next was going to be total, and I needed her to be standing when it happened. I am not proud of that. There is no pride in any of this. But I have to say it clear. She came home on Friday afternoon. She had a bag and she was wearing a yellow shirt I hadn't seen before, and she looked rested in the way a person looks when they have been well taken care of. And there was a moment, just a second, where I looked at her standing in the doorway and something in me wanted to come apart entirely. Not in anger, just in grief, just in the pure grief of a thing ending that you had believed in. I had believed in her. I want that on the record. I had believed in her completely, the way a man believes in the one thing he's built his whole quiet life around. She kissed me on the cheek and said the drive wasn't bad. I said, "Good, sit down." I made dinner. We ate at the table, and I asked about her mother, and she described a week she had not spent. She described walks and meals and conversations with her sisters. She gave me a whole architecture of fiction, and she did it without any trouble. And I sat across from her, and I let her. After dinner, I told her I had something for her. She looked up. I said, "It's not a bad thing. Just wait here." I went into the bedroom and I came back with the divorce papers. I had had them drawn up on Thursday. I knew a man who knew a lawyer, and I had paid cash, and I had the papers in a folder, and I set them on the table in front of her, and I sat back down in my chair. The look on her face. I am not going to describe it in a way that makes me sound like I was powerful in that moment. I was not powerful. I was broken, and I was doing what broken things do, which is break other things. But the look on her face was something I have carried every day since. It was not just shock. It was the look of someone who has had the ground taken from under them by the one person they thought was the ground. She said, "What is this?" I said, "Your father knows. I called him last week." She went very still. I said, "I spoke to your mother. By accident, she called here looking for you, and I answered. I know you weren't there. I know about Marcus. I know where you were." What happened next is something I rehearsed in my mind 100 times before it occurred, and it was nothing like what I had imagined, because in my imagination I was hard and steady, and in the real moment I was neither. She started to say something, and then she stopped, and then she put her hands flat on the table and pressed them down like she was trying to hold the table still. And I watched her try to find something to say, and I watched her not find it. She said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Since Tuesday." She said, "And you let me come home?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" And I didn't answer her. I should have answered her. I should have told her the truth, which was that I had wanted her to come home the way a man wants to see the last of something before it's gone, the way you stand at a window and watch something you love move away down a street, and you don't call after it, you just watch. But I didn't say that. I said nothing, and the silence I gave her was the cruelest thing in that room, worse than the papers, worse than her father knowing, worse than any of it. She signed the papers 6 weeks later. Marcus, I found out eventually, did not leave his wife for her. That is the part that lives in me the sharpest, not because I feel vindicated. There is no vindication in any of this. but because she lost everything and gained nothing, and I had a part in the nothing. I had arranged the nothing with some care. We had a daughter, her name is Renee, and she was 4 years old when all of this happened, and she grew up knowing that her parents did not speak to each other, that her father was a wall, and her mother was a woman who looked tired in the eyes even on good days. And I told myself for years that children are resilient, that she was fine, that she had 2 parents who loved her even if they loved her separately. I told myself that. Renee is 56 now. She lives in Charlotte. She calls me on Sundays, and she is kind to me in the way a person is kind to someone they have forgiven without being asked, which is its own kind of grace and its own kind of ache. She doesn't ask me about her mother, and I don't ask her either. We talk about her kids and the weather and whether I've been eating, and she always says, "Daddy, you have to eat," and I always say, "I'm eating, baby. Don't worry." And that's what we are now. That's what we managed to become out of all that wreckage. Delia died in 2009. Cancer. Her sister called me. I don't know why her sister called me. We hadn't spoken in 20 years, but she called and she said Delia asked her to let me know. I sat with that for a long time. That in her last days she had wanted me to know. I don't know what she wanted me to do with it. I don't know if she wanted me to feel something or come somewhere or just carry the knowledge. I think maybe she just wanted me to know. The way you want a certain person to know certain things, not because it changes anything, just because there are people who knew you when you were whole, and you want them to know when you're gone. I went to the funeral. I sat in the back. I wore a suit that was too big for me. I had lost weight that year, and I sat in the back row, and I looked at the photograph of her they had on the table near the front, a photograph from maybe 10 years earlier, and she looked happy in it, genuinely happy. And I thought, well, she found something somewhere. She found some joy in there somewhere. And I'm glad. I cried in the car afterward. First time I had cried about Delia since the day she walked out of that apartment. 30 years of not crying, and then sitting in the parking lot of a church in Baltimore, weeping into a steering wheel like a man half my age. There is something almost funny about it now. Not funny, something pitiable about it, about the economy of grief, how it stores itself and draws interest. I didn't do right by her. That's the sentence I come back to. I didn't do right by her, and I knew it, even as I was doing wrong. And the knowing didn't stop me. That's what I can't get past. That's what the whole long rest of my life has circled around. The fact that I knew. I knew I was taking something she could never get back when I called her father. I knew that when I sat across from her at that dinner table, I was performing a kindness that was actually a trap. I knew that when I withdrew the money, I was punishing her in a way that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with wanting her to feel something close to what I felt. And she felt it. That much I'm certain of. I remarried when I was 43. A woman named Gloria who was steady and good and who understood from the beginning that I came with a heaviness I couldn't fully explain. She never pushed. She made room for the heaviness the way you make room in a house for a piece of furniture that doesn't quite fit. You rearrange things a little and you stop noticing after a while. We had 12 good years. She passed from a stroke in 1997, and I have not been with a woman since, and I don't say that as any kind of virtue. It's just what happened. I just ran out of the particular courage it takes to let someone know you. Gloria knew me better than she let on, I think. She said to me once, years into the marriage, she said, "You're still angry at somebody." I said, "I'm not angry." She said, "It's not the hot kind. You don't have to be loud to be angry." I didn't say anything back. She made a sound that was not quite a sigh and went back to her book, and that was the end of it. But I think about that now. I think she was right. And I think the anger she was talking about was not anger at Delia. I think it was anger at myself, the slow burning kind, the kind you don't even recognize as anger because it looks so much like just being who you are. My father was a hard man. I say that not as an excuse. I am long past making excuses, but because I think it belongs in this telling. He was hard in the way men of his generation were hard, which is to say he had survived things that required him to stop feeling certain things, and he never got the feelings back. He worked. He provided. He was faithful to my mother for 41 years, and I never once heard him say he loved her. Not once. I heard him say things that were meant to mean it. He'd say, "Your mother's a good woman." He'd say, "Your mother's got more sense than most." But the direct words, those 3 small words, I never heard them. I think I learned something from that, something I should not have learned. I think I learned that love was a thing you showed by staying, by providing, by keeping the lights on and the rent paid. And those things are part of love. They are, I'm not saying they're nothing, but I let them stand in for the whole when they were only the frame, and I left the inside empty, and then I was surprised when the inside couldn't hold. Delia was a woman who needed the words. I knew that. She told me. She told me in the early years in that direct way she had. She said, "Baby, I need you to tell me. I need to hear it." And I said things like, "You know how I feel." And she said, "I need you to say it." And I would say it, but it would be stiff in my mouth, like a word in a language you learned late. And she would smile, but the smile had something behind it that I didn't let myself look at. I wonder sometimes. I wonder if a man had been filling her up with words, just words, easy words, that I found so difficult. I wonder if that had something to do with what happened. I am not excusing what she did. I am not distributing blame to make myself lighter. I am just wondering, late at night, alone, the way old men wonder, whether the absence I created in that house was the particular shape of what eventually walked in to fill it. I was 29 years old when I found out. 29. I had been working at that plant for 6 years. I had strong hands and a bad back that I didn't tell anyone about yet because I couldn't afford to stop working. I had plans. We had plans. We were going to buy a house by the time I was 32. We had talked about it. We had a jar in the kitchen with cash in it for the down payment. It was more symbolic than practical, but we believed in it. Delia had planted tomatoes on the fire escape in yogurt containers, and she was so proud of those tomatoes you would have thought she'd grown an orchard. We were trying. That's what I want you to hold on to. We were actually trying. The marriage wasn't dead when she went to Marcus. That's the part that cut the deepest. If we had already been in the ground, maybe it would have felt different. But we were trying. I was working those hours for us. I was paying that rent for us. I was coming home tired and silent. Yes, I was silent. I am a silent man, and I have always been a silent man, and that silence cost me more than I can calculate. But I was there. I was there every night. I think about that jar on the kitchen counter. We left the apartment 11 months after I handed her those papers. I moved my things out first. She moved out a few weeks after. I don't know what happened to the jar. I don't know if she took it or threw it away or left it for the next tenant. It's a small thing. It is an objectively small thing in the accounting of everything that went wrong. But I think about it sometimes. Late like this, that jar with maybe $60 or $70 in it, all the ones and fives we'd been dropping in there, and I wonder where it went. Renee asked me once, she was maybe 16. She asked me why her parents got divorced. I said, we wanted different things. She looked at me for a moment. She has always been perceptive. That child. She sees around corners. And she said, is that really all? I said, it's enough. She let it go. She always let things go with me, Renee did, and I'm not sure if that's patience or just the resignation a child develops when they learn the closed doors are going to stay closed. Either way, it makes me sad. The things a child learns to stop asking. I should have told her more. Not everything. She didn't need everything. But more than a vague sentence about wanting different things. I should have told her that her mother was a woman who loved her fiercely and made mistakes, and that her father also loved her fiercely and made mistakes, and that the two sets of mistakes ran into each other, and what remained was Renee, and that Renee was the only part of the whole business that was entirely good. I never said that. I thought it many times, and I never said it, and now Renee is 56, and her own kids are in high school, and I'm sitting here in this room at 2 in the morning thinking about all the sentences I kept in my mouth when I should have opened it. There's a particular kind of man, I think, and I have been this kind of man, who believes that feeling things deeply means something, who believes that the feeling itself is a form of communication, who is always slightly surprised to learn that the people around him had no idea what he was feeling, because he never told them. I have been surprised by this many times in my life, and I still did not learn to speak. My brother James used to say, you hold yourself like you're protecting something that isn't there anymore. James died in 1991. Heart attack, 53 years old. He was the one person who knew me without me having to explain myself, and when he died, something went with him that I have not been able to find the replacement for in 30 years. Not the love of it. You can find love. People are generous with love if you let them be, but the being known part. That's the harder thing to replace. I told James about what I had done. Not all of it. I told him about the bank account and about calling her father, and he looked at me for a long time, and he didn't say what I expected him to say. He didn't say, good, she deserved it, or anything like that. He said, you're going to have to live with that. You know, just like that. You're going to have to live with that. And I said, I know. And he nodded, and we went back to our drinks, and we never spoke about it again. And that was the only confession I made before this one, sitting here now, this late, this old. Living with it has been its own long education. For a while I was certain I had done the right thing, not the kind thing. I didn't fool myself about the kind thing, but the right thing. She had lied. She had been unfaithful. She had spent a week somewhere with a man while I was dragging myself through 16-hour shifts, and she had called me from that somewhere and told me about walks she hadn't taken with a mother who was wondering where she was. She had looked me in the eye over dinner and described a week of fiction with a steady voice. Those are not small things. I am not pretending those are small things. But when I called her father, I wasn't protecting myself. I was loading a gun and handing it to someone else and stepping back and saying, I never touched her. That's the true shape of it. I took the weapon I had built over a careful week, and I put it where it would do the most damage, and I kept my own hands clean, and I called that righteousness for a long time. Her father never spoke to her again. Not really. They had some version of a relationship in the years after. I heard this through Renee, holidays and birthdays, phone calls, but the particular warmth he had for her, the specific way he had looked at his oldest daughter, that was gone. I had taken it. I had taken it as deliberately as I took the money from that bank account, and I had told myself it was just the truth coming out, and the truth is nobody's fault. But I chose to tell it. I chose the timing and the detail and the tone, and I chose her father specifically because I knew what it would cost her. There were other things I could have done with the truth. I could have confronted her. I could have walked out. I could have said nothing and simply filed papers and let her begin her life wherever it was going to go. I chose the option that would break her in the specific place I knew she was breakable. That's the thing. That's the thing right there. She trusted me with her father, the way you trust a person, with the soft parts of yourself when you love them. She had shown me where she was softest, and I had taken note, and then when the time came, I had used it. I had filed it away like a man who is always, somewhere, preparing for war. What does that make me? I don't want to answer that fully. I have been not answering it fully for 40 years, and I don't know if I have the capacity at 81 to answer it in a way that's honest enough to be worth anything. But I'll say this. I think it makes me a man who confused hurt with permission. I think I believed that what she had done gave me license to do anything in return, that pain was a currency you could spend however you wanted, and I spent it on destruction. I was good at other things. I want to say that too, because I'm not interested in a simple accounting. I was a decent father, I think. Not warm the way some fathers are warm, but present. I went to the school plays, and I helped with the math, and I drove Renee to her friends' houses and sat in parking lots reading the newspaper while she was inside, and came back exactly when I said I would. I was reliable. She could count on me to be where I said I'd be. In some households, that is not a small thing. I was a good worker. I gave that plant 22 years, and I never called in sick unless I truly was, and I trained young men coming in, and I was patient with them when I didn't have to be. There are men out there, grown men with their own children now, who learned something useful from me. I was faithful to Gloria. Every day of those 12 years, I was faithful to her, and I was kind to her, in the ways I knew how to be kind, and I was there when her mother got sick, and I held her hand at the funeral, and I meant it. I'm not only the worst thing I did, but the worst thing I did was bad enough to sit here 40 years later at 2 a.m. and still not have made peace with it. That's the measure I have to work with. There are nights I think about Delia in those weeks after she came home. She would have had to call Marcus and tell him. She would have had to call her sisters. She would have had to figure out how to talk to her father, who now knew. She would have had to navigate all of that while also packing up the apartment and figuring out where to go and what to tell Renee, who was 4 years old and didn't understand why her parents were moving in different directions. She would have had to do all of that while knowing that I had seen it all coming and said nothing. The waiting was the cruelest part. I know that. She knew it too. She said so in the one conversation we had after the papers were signed. She said, "You could have just told me you knew. You could have just said something." The waiting was the cruelest part. And I had chosen it. I had sat in that chair by the window on a Tuesday night, and I had chosen to wait, specifically, because I knew it would be the cruelest part. I told myself I was protecting myself. I told myself that if I had confronted her immediately, she would have lied more. She would have talked me around. She was good with words in a way I was not. She could make a man doubt what he had just heard with both ears. And so I needed time to build something solid, something she couldn't talk me out of. I told myself that. But you can protect yourself without picking up a weapon. You can leave without burning the house down first. I didn't want to just leave. That's the admission that costs the most. I didn't want to simply be hurt and leave. I wanted her to know the specific weight of what she had done, and not just know it abstractly, but feel it in the places she couldn't recover from. And I had engineered that with a coldness that I am not sure I would have believed myself capable of if I hadn't lived inside it. There is a man in me that I don't like. I have known that man for 60 years. He is quiet, and he is patient, and he keeps very careful track of things, and he waits. He waits with a stillness that looks like peace but isn't. I have managed him. I have kept him from surfacing in most of the situations where he wanted to. With Gloria, I mostly managed him. With Renee, I mostly managed him. But in that apartment in 1983, with Delia coming through the door in her yellow shirt, I stepped back and I let him take over, and he did what he does, which is exact and quiet and total. I don't know where he came from, that man. Maybe from watching my father hold everything in until it had nowhere to go. Maybe from growing up in a world that kept reminding me of what I couldn't afford to let show. Maybe he's just mine, just the particular shape my damage took, and there's no genealogy for it. I've turned it over many ways, and I don't have the answer. What I have is the memory of her face when I put those papers on the table. 40 years, and I can close my eyes and see it exactly. The way her hands went flat on the table, the way she looked at the folder before she looked at me, the way something went out of her eyes that I had put there once, a long time ago, early in our life together, something I had earned and she had given, and that I took back in that moment, or allowed to be taken, which is the same thing. I earned it the first time through small acts over years. I took it back in one evening. That's the math that keeps me up. Renee called me last Sunday. She always calls on Sundays. She has never missed a Sunday in probably 20 years, which is its own kind of devotion, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She told me her youngest, Marcus Jr., he goes by MJ. He's starting to look at colleges, good schools. She sounded proud the way I used to sound proud of her when I let myself, which I didn't do often enough out loud. I said, "That boy is sharp." She said, "He is. He's so sharp, Daddy." And then she said, "I hope he doesn't get my stubbornness." I said, "What stubbornness? You're one of the most patient people I know." She laughed and said, "Not about the important things." I knew what she meant. Think she was talking about me. I think she was saying gently, in the way she says things gently, that she had waited a long time for things from me that I never gave, and she had stopped waiting with a stubbornness she wished she didn't have. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I'm proud of you, Renee." She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "I know, Daddy. I've always known." And maybe she has always known, and the knowing without the saying was enough for her in the way it wasn't enough for her mother. But I think about that pause, that second before she answered, and I wonder what was in that second for her, whether it was simple or complicated, whether she reached for the answer or had to think about it. The things we don't say create their own kind of weather. The people we love live in that weather, and they learn to dress for it but it is still cold. I have been a cold man. Not in every way, not in all the ways, but in the ones that counted most. In the ways that require you to open your mouth and say the plain truth of what you feel without dressing it up in labor or provision or loyalty. I could show love like nobody's business. I could not, for most of my life, say it in a way that landed warm. There's a window in this room and I can see the street from here. Empty now, this hour. Sometimes a car goes by and the headlights move across the ceiling, and I watch them, and I think about all the people who are awake at 2 in the morning, all the people carrying things they haven't said. I wonder sometimes if this is the particular curse of certain men like me, men who are built or broken into silence, whether we all end up here eventually, old and quiet and alone with the inventory. I don't say alone as a complaint. I made choices. The aloneness is appropriate in a way. It fits me. But I miss Gloria. I miss her steadiness. I miss the way she moved around a kitchen. I miss that she could make me laugh, a genuine, surprised laugh, which is rare for a man like me. And she knew it, and she was pleased with herself when she did it. I miss being known by somebody, even imperfectly known. Even with all the things I hid, she knew enough of me to call me out gently about the anger that wasn't hot. She was right about that. I have been angry for a very long time. Not at Delia, not exactly. The anger at Delia went through its seasons and eventually became something else, became grief, became a complicated gratitude for the years we had, the 4 good years before the bad ones. The anger now is older and quieter, and it's aimed mostly inward, at the version of me who sat in that chair on a Tuesday night and chose wrong, who chose the weapon when he could have chosen the wound. The wound would have healed. I know that now. The wound of simply being hurt and saying so and letting things be ugly and real, that would have healed. What I chose instead did not heal. What I chose instead just calcified, became this, became an old man, sitting alone at 2 in the morning, talking to no one. Talking to you, I suppose. Whoever you are. Whatever this is. I'm not sure why I'm saying it now, except that I'm 81, and the chest in the mornings and the 2 o'clock awakenings have been getting more frequent, and there is a thing that happens when a man begins to feel the approach of the end of his life, which is that the things he hasn't said start to get louder. I have dreamed about Delia. Not recently. She hasn't come in dreams recently, but for a long time after she died I would dream about her young. Not as she was in the bad years, but as she was in the beginning, when we were both young and broke and full of a conviction about the future that I am no longer sure we had earned. She would be laughing in the dreams. She was a great laugher, Delia, loud and unself-conscious, the kind of laugh that embarrassed her in restaurants, and in the dreams she would be laughing about something couldn't quite hear, and she would look over at me, and the dream would always end there. I think about what I took from her, not just the money, not just her father's particular warmth, not just the version of herself she was trying to become. I think I took from her the ability to tell the story of her first marriage as something with any dignity in it. You can tell the story of a marriage that ended badly if both people behaved badly. You can tell the story of a marriage that ended because of infidelity if the other person found out and fell apart and did something human in response. But what she had was a story about a man who knew and waited and planned and executed and smiled at her over a dinner she'd cooked and then put papers on the table. That's a harder story to carry. That's a story that makes a woman wonder what she actually was to a man, whether she was a person or a problem being managed. I don't think I thought of her as a problem. I think I loved her. I think I genuinely loved her in the way I was capable of loving at 29, which was real but also incomplete. And I think the incompleteness was mine, and I laid it at her feet in ways I can see now that I couldn't see then. But whether I loved her or not is almost beside the point now. The question that has followed me is simpler. Why didn't I just call her back? Why didn't I, on that Tuesday night, call her back and say, "Your mother called here. She's worried. Where are you?" Why didn't I give her the chance to explain, or lie more, or fall apart, or come home on her own, or any of the 1,000 things that might have happened if I had just picked up the phone and said what I knew? Why did I put the phone down and sit in the dark and start building something? I think I know the answer. I think I was afraid that if I called her back, she would find a way to make me doubt myself. And I think I was afraid that if she came home before I was ready, I would forgive her. I think at the bottom of all of it, I was afraid of what I would choose if she stood in front of me and cried and said she was sorry. I think I knew I would choose her. I think I knew I was still, even in that moment, enough in love with her that her asking would have been enough. And so I didn't give her the chance to ask. I built the trap before she could get home and step over it. I punished her for what I was afraid she could make me do. That's the thing I've never said out loud until now. Right here, right now, in this room, this late. I punished her for having that kind of power over me. I punished her for the fact that I loved her enough to forgive her, and I didn't want to forgive her. I wanted to be the wronged man. I wanted to be the man who had worked himself to the bone for a woman who betrayed him and then done something about it. I wanted that narrative clean. But people are not clean. Marriages are not clean. Love is not clean. And what I wanted required me to move fast and alone, to remove the possibility of her being a person in front of me, to make her into a case I was building, rather than a woman I had loved for 6 years. I made her into a case, and I won it, and I have been losing ever since. My granddaughter, Renee's oldest, she asked me once what I regretted. She's 31 now, studying to be a therapist of all things, and she was asking as both granddaughter and student, I could tell. There was a little notebook in her hand, and she had the courtesy not to open it. I liked that about her. She said, "Grandpa, what's something you really regret?" I said, "I kept too quiet for too long about things that mattered." She wrote something down. Then she looked up and said, "Is there something specific?" I said, "Most things that matter are specific." She smiled. She has Delia's laugh, that girl, the unself-conscious one. It came out the side of her and surprised her. And she said, "You're terrible, Grandpa." I said, "I know, baby. I know." But I didn't tell her. I've never told anyone. Until now. Until this room, this hour, this strange necessity that old age creates, the way it strips you of the patience for keeping certain things. I don't know what I'm hoping for. I don't think I'm hoping for forgiveness. Delia is gone and her father is gone, and the specific damage I did lives in places I can't reach anymore. I don't think I'm hoping to feel better, because I don't deserve to feel better, and I know it. I think I'm just tired of being the only one who knows the full shape of it. I think there is a loneliness in carrying a secret for 40 years that is different from other kinds of loneliness. It's heavier than just being alone. It's being alone with the worst of yourself, with no one to say, yes, I see what you did. Yes, that was wrong. Yes, and you're still here. And so is the rest of it. I'm still here, 81 years old. Bad chest, good memory. One daughter who calls on Sundays, a granddaughter who wants to be a therapist and writes things in a little notebook, a neighborhood that's changed so much around me. I sometimes feel like I'm living in a photograph of a place that no longer exists. I'm still here, and Delia isn't, and the jar is gone, wherever it went, and the yellow shirt is 40 years in the past, and I'm sitting here in the middle of the night trying to say the thing I have been not saying since I was 29 years old. I was wrong. Not about leaving. Maybe leaving was the right thing. Maybe the marriage was over in some essential way I couldn't have saved, regardless. I'll never know that. But I was wrong about how I left. I was wrong about the bank account, and I was wrong about calling her father, and I was wrong about the dinner and the warmth I performed while I was holding a loaded thing behind my back. I was wrong about making her feel like less than a person, like a situation to be resolved. And I was wrong, most of all, about not picking up the phone on a Tuesday night and saying what I knew, about choosing silence, because silence was the version where I kept the most power. I was 29 years old, and I had already learned to choose power over presence, and I did not question that choice for a very long time. I'm questioning it now, for all the good that does. The street outside is still empty. One car went by about 10 minutes ago, headlights slow, somebody with somewhere quiet to be, or nowhere at all. I watched the light move across the ceiling, and I thought, somewhere out there is a 29-year-old man sitting in a chair on a Tuesday night, and his wife has just been found out, and he has a choice to make. I want to tell him something, but I don't know what I'd say that would matter. I don't know if there are words that reach a man who has gone cold. When you go cold like that, words bounce off. You have to feel something first. And I couldn't feel anything that night. Not really. I had gone somewhere past feeling. I was operating, I was building. And by the time I came back enough to feel anything real, she was already in that apartment doorway in the yellow shirt, and it was already too late. Maybe it was too late before she even came home. Maybe once I sat in that dark kitchen and started planning instead of crying, it was already done. The chest is tight tonight. Not frightening tight, I've learned the difference, but present in the way that reminds you it's there. I should sleep. I know I should sleep. Renee will call on Sunday and ask if I've been resting, and I will say yes, and she will know I'm half lying. I think about the tomatoes sometimes, those yogurt container tomatoes on the fire escape. I don't know why that comes back to me as often as it does. In the grand inventory of that marriage, there are larger things, more consequential things, things with real stakes and real damage, and yet I find myself sitting here and thinking about those small green tomatoes on the fire escape railing, and the way Delia would water them every morning in her robe before the day started. She was so serious about them. She had read something about the soil mixture, and she had a little notebook where she tracked when she watered them. I used to tease her about that notebook. I said, Delia, they're tomatoes, not a science project. And she said, everything worth doing is worth doing right. And that was such a Delia thing to say, so certain and warm at the same time. And I think I smiled, even though I pretended not to. We ate them in August, off the vine, standing on the fire escape in the morning. They were smaller than store tomatoes, and slightly misshapen, and they were the best tomatoes I ever had. I think it was the specific taste of something tended, the flavor of attention. I haven't had a tomato since that. I didn't think about those ones. Even now, 40 years later, I buy tomatoes from the grocery store sometimes, and I slice them and put them on a plate, and I think about standing on that fire escape in the August of our 3rd year, when things were still good, or at least seemed good, or at least were good enough that we could stand on a fire escape eating small tomatoes and not say a word and have that be enough. That was before. Everything I think about has a before in it and an after, and the line between them is a Tuesday night in a kitchen with a phone and grease under my fingernails. I worked at that plant for 22 years. I said that already, but I don't think I said what it cost. There's a thing that happens to a man's body when he does heavy work for 2 decades that no one tells you about when you're young, and thinking the body will just absorb it indefinitely. I started feeling my back in my late 30s. Not the usual aches. A particular thing that happened when I turned a certain way, a catching and releasing, a small betrayal. By the time I was 45, I was taking aspirin every morning before I got out of bed, not as a habit I had chosen, but as a necessity, as the only way to get from lying down to standing without something in my lower back lighting up. I never told Gloria how bad it was. She knew in the way wives know things. They aren't told, because she would watch me get up in the mornings and she would say nothing, and I would say nothing, and we would just be 2 people in a kitchen, not acknowledging the obvious thing. I think she knew I needed to believe I was managing it. I think she allowed me that dignity even when it wasn't really true. I retired at 62, not because I wanted to, because the back gave me an ultimatum, and the union gave me a number, and the number was enough to live on modestly if I was careful. I remember the last day at the plant. The men did the thing they do, the handshakes and the cake and the jokes about finally getting to sleep in, and I stood there and smiled and shook every hand, and I drove home, and I sat in the kitchen, and I did not know what to do with myself. I had been working since I was 16 years old, 46 years of somewhere to be, something to produce, a body doing a function in the world that was measurable and clear. And then nothing, just the kitchen and the window and the days. The first year of retirement, I must have driven Gloria nearly crazy. Not because I was difficult, at least I hope not, but because I was lost in a way I had no vocabulary for. I had never learned to simply be, to sit in a yard and let the afternoon pass without accounting for it. I had always measured myself in output, in hours, in what I could point to at the end of a day, and retirement removed the possibility of that pointing, and I didn't know what I was without it. Gloria said, "Find something to make." She said it practically, not as philosophy. She was a practical woman. She said, "Go to the hardware store and find something to fix or build." I started fixing things in the house, then the neighbor's house. Then I started building small things in the garage, shelves, a workbench, a bird feeder I never actually put up. The bird feeder is still in the garage somewhere. I should have put it up. I meant to. There was always some reason not to. The work calmed me. The work had always calmed me. And I think, going back, I think that's part of what happened with Delia. I was calmer at work than I was at home. At home, I didn't know what to do with my hands. At the plant, there was always something the hands were for. And a man who doesn't know what to do with his hands can become a man who doesn't know what to do with himself at all. And a man who doesn't know what to do with himself is a man who fills the room with a particular kind of absence. Not loud, not dramatic, just present as absence. And Delia had lived inside that absence for years before she found somewhere else to be. I know that now. I don't say it to excuse her. She made a choice, and it was a choice that hurt me in ways I was still finding years later. The way you find pieces of something broken in corners of a room months after it's shattered. You think you swept it all up, and then you find another piece, and you remember the breaking all over again. I was finding pieces of that for a long time, but I had built the absence she moved away from. I had built it with every quiet dinner, every night I came home and sat in the chair and didn't say much, every time she asked about my day, and I said fine, and let the conversation close rather than open it. I had built it with my father's silence and my own, and I had called it strength when it was actually just a wall I hid behind, because the other side of the wall was terrifying to me. Love was terrifying to me. The full weight of it, the vulnerability of being seen and knowing you could be left. I had learned, somewhere very young, that the safest thing was to give enough to keep the person close, but not so much that their leaving would take everything. I had learned to ration. And Delia was a woman who needed the whole supply. She was not wrong to need it. I was not right to withhold it. We were two people who wanted different things from love, and we never said so because we didn't have the language, and we didn't have the courage, and we had a daughter and a jar of money on the counter, and those things felt like enough of a reason to not say the hard things. Until they weren't. The summer after Delia died, 2009, I drove to Baltimore. I don't know what I intended. I hadn't been to Baltimore in probably 15 years. I drove up on a Saturday, and I found the street we had lived on, the apartment building, and I parked across the street, and I looked at the building for a while. 3rd floor, the windows on the left side. Someone had put window boxes in now, red flowers, geraniums, or something. Very bright. You could see them from the street. I thought about the fire escape on the other side of the building, the side I couldn't see from where I was parked. I thought about whether anyone was growing anything on it now. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, and then I drove home. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof that it had been real, maybe. Proof that we had lived there, and been young there, and tried there, and that the whole thing hadn't just happened in my head, that it was an actual place in the actual world, with actual windows, and an actual fire escape where actual small tomatoes had once grown. It was real. We were real. That might sound like nothing. It might sound like the least remarkable thing a man could confirm. But there are times when the past gets so far away, so many years between then and now, that you need to see the building to believe you actually lived in it. I believe it. I was there. She was there. We were trying. And then I stopped trying in a particular way, and she stopped trying in a different way, and we collided out of each other's orbits, and I handled the collision with a coldness I am still accounting for. Renee was born in 1979. I remember the hospital, the particular yellow of the hallway, the vending machine outside the waiting room that had a broken light on the P in Pepsi, so it just said Epsi. I remember the nurse coming out and saying, "You have a daughter." And I remember standing up from that plastic chair and the whole world rearranging itself around that fact. A daughter. I had a daughter. I went in to see Delia, and she was exhausted in that total way that leaves a person temporarily outside of themselves, just present in their body, without any guard up. And she was holding Renee, and she looked up at me and she said, "Look what we did. Look what we did." I have turned that sentence over many times. The simplicity of it, the collaboration of it. We, not I. She did the majority of the labor, in an obvious sense. But she said we, and she meant it, and I believed it. We had made something. Out of the two of us, and our rationed love, and our small Baltimore apartment, and our fire escape tomatoes, we had made this specific particular person, who had her mother's forehead, and I found out later my habit of going quiet when things mattered. Renee has my quiet. She would probably say she's working on it. She sees a therapist herself. She mentioned it once, casually, the way people do when they've made peace with something. And I thought good. I thought good for her. She is undoing the thing I handed her. And that is a better use of her time than keeping it. I was glad for her. I didn't tell her I was glad. But I was. The quiet runs in us. The closeness. I see it in her sometimes. The way she'll start to say something and then redirect, take a different route, say something easier. I know that road. I know every turn on it. And I want to say to her, take the harder way, Renee. Take the harder way. Every time you have a choice, the easier way leads to this room and this hour and this particular kind of sleeplessness. Take the harder way. But I don't say that either, which is exactly the problem. There's something almost absurd about it when I sit with it long enough. A man who knows precisely what the silence cost him, who can feel the price of it in his chest at 2 a.m, who has catalogued every room the silence closed, and every person the silence pushed away, and who still defaults to the silence, still rides that old road out of habit and fear and the absence of a better model. My father is dead 40 years and his silence still lives in me. That's how far a thing can travel. I have one photograph of Delia. It's in the drawer in the nightstand. I didn't put it there on purpose. It migrated over the years with other things, papers and batteries, and a watch band I never replaced. It's from early in the marriage, before Renee, before any of it, the two of us standing in front of somebody's house at a cookout. She is holding a paper plate, and she is laughing, that laugh. And I am standing beside her, and I am almost smiling, which was a lot for me, and I am looking at the camera, but she is not. She is turned slightly toward me, still in the middle of whatever just made her laugh. I don't look at it often, but I know it's there. I knew it was there before I found it again in the drawer. That's the kind of knowledge you carry, not in your thoughts exactly, but in the body, the way you always know where the sore place is, even when you're not touching it. She was laughing, and she was turned toward me, and that was us. That was the real of us, before I chose the wrong thing. I don't know how much longer I'll be sitting here. It gets later, and the body gets heavier, and eventually I'll go back to bed, and lie there until morning comes through the curtain the way it always does. Grey first, then white, then the specific yellow that means the day has started, whether you're ready or not. I'll get up and make coffee. I'll sit at the kitchen table and drink it and look out the window at the street. And it will be another day of being this man, this old man, with this particular history. And Renee will call on Sunday, and the chest will be what it is. That's what's left. That's what you get to the end of the road and find waiting. The things you did and the things you didn't do, and the long, slow, ordinary days between then and now, and the coffee, and the window, and the light coming through, and the knowing that somewhere in the nightstand drawer there is a photograph of a woman laughing and turning toward you, and that once, a long time ago, you were the reason She was turning. I was the reason. I should have been better. I should have been